Yeah, man. That's cool. Yeah, me and Chad have been friends for a long time, so definitely happy to do the show.
Well, appreciate having you on,
Yeah,
buddy. It's been a long time. I think we go back to 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, because it's pre-Gwar. When
Might even be a little earlier than
it
that.
might be.
I mean, I remember you were really one of my earliest supporters, getting started in, heavy touring and all that stuff. You were looking out for me when I was in another couple of bands before that. So,
Yeah,
you've always stuck by me, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. And I think that because I got started in 2010, I think, with Black Hearts right around in that. So I mean, and I know you were pretty early on in that connection. So yeah, it's been a I think the best part of that is, and honestly with this industry as a whole is like when you can make a connection and the longevity that those connections can have, and over distance and over time, where you continually stay in touch with people and you meet, some pretty amazing people. So.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. So
Chad's good at making connections, man. Chad's like one of the most like connected guys like I have ever met. If somebody's to be known in the business, he probably knows him.
I try. There's a lot of good people. It's to me it's just interesting because it's and likens back to why I'm doing this podcast, right? Because the personalities behind the faces, there's so much more to Brent than a guitar, and we're gonna figure that out, right?
Absolutely.
We'll see.
He's like, we'll see.
I'm gonna try to crack that nut. All right, here we go. So, doing a little bit of research on you, the furthest back I can find on you is about 01 for bands.
Oh wow.
Is that Ekeldama or whatever, however you pronounce that?
Oh wow, yeah. Holy shit, that's a long time ago. I think that was like that was the first real gigging band I think I did, and then which is I was singing for that band because I had to convince people that I knew how to play guitar early on. Like I joined the band and we had a guitar player, and I was just like, well, can I write some songs with you guys? And the good dude was like, why? I play guitar. I was like, oh, all right. So it took me a little while to get some headway there, but that band, it was fun, but the band like fizzled out and everything, and
sure,
we were just trying to find our feet, so to speak.
So, and how old are you about this time, man? Like when you first started when you first started getting playing in bands and stuff.
That was probably 2001. I was born in 83, so 2001 would have been like 18, right? Is that the correct math?
I don't do math.
So
you were born in 83?
Yeah.
You were a lot younger than I thought, man.
So he's 5 years older than I am.
I don't even want to talk about how much younger you are than I am.
I think that was 18, 19 years old, something like that.
Awesome.
Because I remember the band I played in after that was a little bit more serious. And I remember I joined the band. I had like a fake ID and we were touring. And those guys, I told them I was in my early 20s because we were going to bars all the time. Those guys were like heavy drinkers. So
rise and grind, everyone. Hey, bands, we all know how important the merch game is and what it can mean for the growth of your band. Having unique and valuable merchandise can make or break tour or even the funding of your next album. Grindcore Coffee has the perfect addition to your merch table and your online store. Co-branded Grindcore Coffee puts your logo and your artwork on bags of premium small batch Grindcore Coffee. Select your blend and target your fans with killer, unique, and delicious tasting merch by co-branding with Grindcore Coffee. Email Grindcore today for more information. Links are in the description. Born and raised where?
Pretty much Richmond, Virginia, or I guess you could say Hanover County. So Hanover is probably a few minutes west of central Richmond, and Richmond's pretty much consists of 3 counties: Henrico, Chesterfield, and Hanover. So I grew up in Hanover, which was, I guess, the more rural, wooded part. All the rednecks were from there.
Right. Well, I can't, just from what I know of you, I can't, like, you don't seem like a city guy,
Nah, not really.
Yeah.
we tried so hard to get out of there because like it was kind of a music desert, I guess. There wasn't really a lot of punk rockers, no metalheads. You know, it was few and far between. So it was like I could count on one hand, you know, the kids from my school that we were going to shows with, and so we just desperately tried to be in the city when we were young. And then of course it was like after a couple years of touring and seeing big cities and how the real big ones operate, you know, you started to make your way back home, you know, because you know, it's nice to not worry about your lawnmower getting stolen.
Or anything. Yeah.
And Richmond's not as bad as a lot of other places, you know, but I don't want to live there.
Right. Right. And I'm with you. Like, you know, living in larger cities is, you know, I grew up in a very pretty small town. You know, I think when I grew up here through my youth, we were probably 75,000 maybe.
Because Sioux Falls grew pretty quickly.
Yeah. Too quick. Yeah. But, you know, so 75,000 is nice. You got space, you know, when you could be to the edge of town and no time flat. So you get used to the openness and the escape from people.
Lack of traffic and easy to travel to places back and forth. Yeah.
But I think it's almost like you can tell people who were born and raised in a city and people who were born and raised a little more rural.
Oh yeah.
So. Yeah. When you get older too, and you realize that anywhere is only as far as a plane, train, or automobile. It's like it doesn't really matter if you live out in the middle of nowhere. It's like you can hop on the internet and talk to people from South Dakota, or you know, when you do like the bigger touring acts. I mean, some of those guys don't even live in the same states. You know, the crew's all over the place, so it's like you just fly together and meet. So, you know, I think that helps not feeling isolated. But you know, as a kid, I definitely felt that way. Like I felt trapped. But
right.
You know, you get older, and I think when you're young, you don't have means to just get up and go. So it changes, I guess, with time.
Yeah, I think when you're a kid, you dream of city life until you're older, and then you dream of peace and quiet.
That's definitely true, man. And you know, it's actually pretty common now for bands to be like in different states, and sometimes even in different countries with like technology now and stuff like that too. It's even more commonplace now.
For sure. So you kind of progressed through and ended up ultimately in Cannabis Corpse. Give me the lowdown on that. Were you after like an original member coming in after the fact, or how did that whole thing swing?
No, they that one I don't recall exactly when it started, but and I didn't really listen to them when it first came out, and then I think it was like I went to but I knew all the guys in the band. So I went to a gig, and I can't remember who the headlining act was. It may have even been them, but it was a show at Alley Cats. And when I saw the show, what I appreciated about it was just kind of the sound, the structure to the songs, and just the overall, like the style of it. And at the time, it reminded me a lot of the death metal I saw like going to shows as a kid. And so I was just like, "Hey, this is cool. I'd like to be a part of this." And I only had one guitar player at the time. It was Nick Paulus, and I remember bumping into him after the gig and was like, "Hey, man, yeah, I think you need another guitar player. I think you need two." You know?
Every band needs two.
Yeah. So he was just like, "Oh yeah, we'll see." And then I think it was a weird time because like I ended up I got the call like maybe sometime way after that, and it was kind of out of the blue, and I was kind of working with the drummer we were trying to get something else going, and he kind of just heard me play old Cannibal Corpse songs and was just like, well, if he can play that, of course he can play this, so you know, let's ask him to join up. So I went on like one tour with them, and it was kind of weird because like the tour I thought was fun and it was great, but I ended up getting like canned like as soon as we got back, you know, within a couple of days. Yeah, and then but it was like over money, you know, they didn't want to split the money that many ways, I guess, and you know, at least that's what I was told, and I just said, well, okay, you know, whatever, and then just moved on. And then I think it might have been like another year or so, but then I filled in for a gig where one of the guys couldn't make it, or then something else happened where I guess Andy, the singer, and Nick, the guitar player, they had some kind of falling out. They split. I got called to come back in, and I didn't really agree with what was happening, but at the same time, I really wanted to just tour and do some gigs and get out there and make some connections. So I actually ended up calling Nick and told him, like, hey man, I'm not trying to take your job, but they left or separated or whatever. So I just like, hey, no disrespect, but I really want to do this because I need to start a career. And he was like, that's cool. So I just wanted to make sure there was no bad blood with him. And which I'm sure that they've all patched things up because he's playing in Waste now with Phil. And so, yeah, I did that a couple years, and it was good. I mean, it was fun while we were doing it. And then we just had a falling out. And that was kind of the end of that.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like sometimes that stuff, especially when you start mixing in travel and the stress of travel and the you don't even make money. The loss of money that happens when you're on the road and whatnot. It puts a burden on a lot of
Yeah, we were all younger, a lot younger too, and different priorities and stuff like that. So I mean, we just didn't. Just the personalities and what our expectations were, I think, weren't aligned at the time. So
sure.
But I think it worked out for the best.
So younger Brent was influenced. Obviously, you mentioned some death metal influence in there. So 18, 19-year-old Brent is into what? What's he?
Oh man,
music wise is one thing too, but beyond that, let's what are your musical influences when you're a teenager, and what are your hobbies as a teenager?
Well, I mean, musical influences. It was a lot of death metal, a little bit of black metal in there at the time, and that kind of grew because death metal to me kind of like got stale at a certain period of time, and I feel like it was during, I guess, the rise of I don't know what you'd call it, the second wave, third wave of black metal, because I mean the first stuff was like 80s and 90s, and
right.
But towards the latter part of the 90s, I think that's when a lot of the bands started to become a little bit more polished. So I don't know, I really liked Barnes era, Cannibal Corpse. I kind of was still like them to this day, but the down tuning thing, I just didn't really grab a hold of me as much, So but them and of course, like Suffocation and all the classic like Death and the band Death and Obituary, it was huge into them. Deicide, Napalm Death, and I still to this day love the 90s Napalm Death stuff. Despite it being so kind of out of place, people by today's standards of what they're doing and what people expect that to be. Because
right.
I think a lot of the metal guys listening to it back then didn't really understand what grindcore was. And grindcore traditionally has like a strong political element, and they just got lumped in as being a death metal band because of like the vocals and the heaviness. But Napalm Death is awesome. So I don't know that, and I didn't really get into like rock and roll and punk until like way later, just because there wasn't really any exposure to it like when I was growing up. All the kids, the only kind of like pipeline I had from the older kids was really like Sepultura and looking at the patches on somebody else's jacket. And then, of course, you go to shows. I'm going to metal shows and I'm learning more about metal and buying metal cassette tapes because they've got blood and guts and blood dripping logos on the front and all that stuff looks cool. And it wasn't until like 19 or 20 when somebody was actually like, you listen to the Ramones? And I was like, no, why would I listen to that? Like, they're not brutal, And then, but the guys that were trying to turn me on to it were like rough and tough, and I was kind of like taken back by it. Like, I thought punk rock was for nerds, and metal is like tough, and they were like, no, you got to listen to the Ramones. And I remember it's like, well, if this guy's doing it, I've seen this guy hold people at gunpoint before, so he's probably right. They're probably really cool. So, so yeah. So that was it.
Yeah, and it's funny because like it was almost the opposite for me, and I think for a lot of people in our region, like because we're so isolated, that we all grew up on punk rock. We were all into DK and all sorts, Corrosion and all that stuff,
Sioux Falls had a big punk scene for
very
a while
big,
too. Yeah, it was very, very big, very
far
notable.
before metal. I think I played in one of the first metal bands here starting in 89, and so we like had to cram the death metal stuff into a punk rock atmosphere. But it really didn't matter. It was one way or the other. I think a lot of that stuff, when we were growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, was you don't, unless you're in a major metro area, you don't get just a death metal bill. You don't get just a crust bill. You got to kind of pile everybody on the same stage and hope it works.
You really just get what you can at that point.
And when you kind of liken back to what you said, Brent, I think that is the kind of the culmination of Napalm Death, right? So they were almost that grindcore atmosphere was that blend of punk rockers who liked metal and a little bit the other way around, but it created, you're right, it created like early Carcass and even early Bolt Thrower and Napalm Death and some of these other bands, Ass Suck and whatever, that I remember the first time I heard him, I was like, it's like metal, but like, what is going on? It's so chaotic and almost noisy that there was a magnetism to it in that regard too.
Yeah. I was just spinning. I don't know why I can't remember the name of the damn records, but it's like the one with Breathe to Breathe on it. Because I still remember when that single came out, when bands still did singles, or record labels tried to push them, I guess, and it was just such an I don't know. I mean, as a teenager, when you're absorbing stuff, it was easy to digest. But I listened to it today, and I would be like, if I was already cemented in this, like, true death metal stuff, this would be jarring to hear, compared. I mean, because it was the same thing with like Sepultura and like Roots. I don't think a lot of people that were not exposed to the new metal thing like expected that. Like, it kind of came out of nowhere, as far as a band drastically changing their sound to that level. I mean, it was lock and step with the time, but it was for death metal. It's like, whoa, you went from Arise to this, like,
right?
What happened?
And Sepultura, like, and Sepultura like had a way too, like back then, like you're talking about, like with new metal and stuff, like the Cavaleras are still to this day like a legendary name. And even though that, like, Sepultura's got pretty much like a totally different lineup now, like Sepultura kind of crossed that line back in the day of like new metal and thrash, because like they always had like a lot of thrash influences too with new metal, and then of course they added like tribal influence into their music as well too. So just a very like unique and notable band at the time. So like when you mentioned them, Brent, like I remember like I had Sepultura posters like all over my wall as a kid. I was a total nerd about that shit.
Oh, dude, they were great. They were awesome. I mean, I love all those records. Chaos AD was just, I mean, it was just as powerful as the earlier fast stuff, but it was just way more, I think, meat and potatoes. Like, the song structure is a little bit more digestible and heavy. And, some people just like the raw and brutal stuff and they just dismiss all that. But I mean, like, it's too dismissive to just say, well, this is too commercial. I mean, like, because I don't care what anybody says. Like, Carcass Heartwork is the best, and people are like, oh, well, they do melodic solos, so people dismiss that too.
I think a lot of those bands in that era tried to, especially when you mentioned like when death metal kind of got derailed, right, to a degree, like so many people copying this, that, and the other, and you're probably rolling into later 90s at that point, and even Entombed, just all of a sudden dropping Wolverine Blues, and you're just like, whoa,
yeah,
you just invented something brand new. That at the time, I think when you hear it, it's the same, like you said, same thing with Roots, right? You hear it and you're like, what? Like, I like it, but I don't know why, and it's not what I expected. And then it almost spawns a whole new genre. I mean, I think Roots absolutely did, and I think Wolverine Blues absolutely did, with the death and roll stuff. And I mean, how many new bands and new, offsprings came from that?
Yeah, it no matter what I appreciate about, I guess, growing up in that era is at least the bands that were coming out, whether you liked the album or not, depending on whoever it was. But all the bands that we just mentioned, like Napalm, Sepultura, Obituary, they were doing very different things like than each other. I mean, they the sound from the band, you could say it's all death metal, whatever, but the contrast is severe. And nowadays, you know, you kind of hear a lot of like death metal bands, and they're just not stepping out of the box the same way. They're not taking risks. They're afraid to sound unique. And I think there's always going to be that, because, you know, not every band is going to be amazing, but I think it's a mistake as any musician to just try and like, well, I'm going to do the same thing this person did to be successful and to be different. It's like, well, they didn't get there from copying somebody else. You know, that's why you have the Morbid Angels and the Judas Priest and, you know, all of these like standout bands. And there's the cookie cutter ones. They're cool for a little bit and they're fun to listen to, you know, but it's the longevity isn't there.
Yeah, so, that code is gone. I think the code that
that's huge.
Was there during the earlier days, you know, just, you know, if Brent's doing something, I can't do what Brent's doing. You know, I gotta do something that doesn't sound like Brent's. So,
and Chad makes a really good point there. You know, we've even talked to people who talk about that code that Chad's talking about. And honestly, Brent, you know, I think back then there was some sort of barrier to entry, whereas nowadays, like, it's ironic, you know, we're talking on social media here, but like social media has almost removed that barrier to entry now, to where there's almost like too many bands copying too many people and stuff like that. Whereas like back in the day, there was not that. So it was almost harder to like crack into things. Whereas like you're talking that like people had substantially different sounds back then, and it was harder to copy somebody. So I honestly feel like that was a better period of time, and there was more notable music, I think, because of that. We're like, nowadays there's so many ripoffs of certain bands and you can kind of tell. So as much as I think like social media is good sometimes it's bad for that too, you know?
Yeah. And everybody's the race, I don't know, race to the bottom or whatever you want to call it, but the competition and record production, I think, has kind of neutered a lot of it too, because you hear even bands that might have some good material, but the record is, the sounds, the drum sounds, the guitar sounds, and it's like it's the exact same thing as the other 50 metal bands that are coming out that same year. And it's just kind of like, you know, like, like as much as I even loved the new Priest record that came out, like, I don't know, a couple years back, it was like, you know, Priest is like favorite band of all time. But I was really disappointed about the drum production. You know, it's like, they sounded great. You know, the record sounds good, but it sounds a lot like other bands as far as the production goes. So like the personality and plus back then, shit, every other record sounded different, you know, like it had a different flavor. And now it's just like, everybody's just trying to.
Power of analog.
Yeah,
it
is.
That's a good point, bro.
I think it's the power of analog.
Yep.
You know, if I go into a room and set up a drum kit, throw mics on it, and we keep it analog, I could come back in tomorrow, try that exact same thing, and it ain't going to sound the same.
Serpents of the Light came, you know, Serpents of the Light came after Once Upon the Cross, and you would instantly hear it and be like, well, that production is nowhere near as good as Once Upon the Cross. But the endearing part was that it was different. You know, it had its own thing. So like you became accustomed to that sound. So whether it was like objectively bad or good, it had its own personality that stands out among those other records, you know, and even all of the old stuff. So that barrier is disappearing too. So that's kind of disappointing. For sure. I think that producers and mixers and bands should just fucking take risks. Don't worry about what plugin or what amplifier you're using. Just put a mic in front of it and focus on the material and go.
Right. Yep. I totally agree, man. So, obviously a big moment in your career, happens when you join Gwar. That's not something the average person gets to go do, obviously. And you know, being probably one of the most cult followed metal bands of all time, how did that happen? I mean, I kind of know a little bit of it because I was there to a degree.
Yeah, because you're one of the first.
I got the phone call.
Emailed, I think.
I got the phone call. Yeah.
I'm gonna need a couple more guitars.
Yeah. So, so I know obviously there's tryouts and all that, but how does it get to that point before then? I mean, how do you get your foot in the door for something like that?
So, I mean, so Richmond is a very small city. You can literally drive across the whole thing in a matter of minutes, and it's not even an exaggeration. It's become a little bit more expansive in the last couple of decades, but whatever, it was still small. Like, I didn't even experience traffic, I think, until like 10 years ago. So we all kind of knew each other, and especially the generation that I was in was probably, I would say, the youngest of this like old Richmond thing. And I don't even know how to describe it, but there's definitely a divide between like even people just a few years younger than me, like they don't remember any of the older bands like at all. Like, so I think there's like some kind of a generational gap there, but I digress. So we all knew each other, like, and I was still a baby back then, but I, had come across Brockie and stuff when I was at shows, 17, 18 years old. And, they didn't know who I was, but I knew who they were, and we try to talk to them or whatever. And then, so as you growing up and playing in more bands, you'll eventually cross paths. Cause that part of old Richmond, those guys like went to shows, Gwar was at shows, all the guys from Lamb of God, you'd see them at shows, before they blew up and everything. And even like other bands that came out of Richmond from that age group that were bigger, which were still firmly cemented in the local scene. And that's disappeared now. But so you just kind of know everybody. And so I knew Dave, and I knew Mike Dirks, and Cory Smoot, the guitar player who came in, like, I guess that was like late 90s, early 2000s. I can't remember exactly, but I think it might have even been like '01 or something. But anyway, he was from Chesterfield. So we didn't meet until maybe, I don't know, early 2000, late 2000s, the early 2000s or something. Teens, whatever you want to call them, before 2010. And we were like, I had a jam space like 2 doors down from him in Chesterfield. And, we just kind of met in passing a little bit. I ended up dating a girl that was like, kind of grew up with him. And so we hung out even more. He ended up doing a record for me, like one of my bands, Antietam 1862. It's like a Civil War themed black metal band, and we recorded a record in his basement. So I kind of knew the guys from that. We did some shows together, and just different side projects. Cory had a bunch of different stuff going on, Mens Rea. So it was just really incestuous. And then through him, and I got to meet the guys even more, and was just kind of around. And I think that's really it, is just kind of just being present and being, recognized and being known. So it's not like we were hanging out every day with the Gwar guys, but they knew who I was. So when I guess he ended up passing away, died on tour, pretty traumatic time for the band. And it took them a little while to bring somebody else in. And they tried out a handful of people, and eventually I got that call to come in and do it. And I was pretty, I guess, happy and sad at the same time, because I still remember finding out that Cory passed away and where I was, and dealing with that whole thing. And all of us were in town in Richmond when it happened. And of course, those guys are out on the road. So there was just like this big disconnect, and it was horrible, but they needed a guy. And kind of going through all that and knowing his widow and all that stuff, and his unborn kid, and it was a tough time, but I didn't want anybody else to have the job. I didn't think it was right. I didn't think that anybody else would do it justice. And I really wanted to keep it in the family. So I kind of felt like I would be like the caretaker of that legacy, so to speak, or at least be able to pay respect to it,
right,
to him and the band and everything. So I just made sure that I knew every fucking note to every fucking song, and learned the solos. Try to get him exactly the way he played them and stuff. It's like, of course, any gig you can do your own thing, but I was just like, nah, there's no way I can't not get the gig if I just do it, do exactly what it's supposed to be. And I only had like maybe 2 or 3 days to rehearse the songs. And I just thought it was kind of funny because like I showed up and did what I had to do, and I found out like the other guys got like weeks. And I was like, all right.
Wow. Jeez.
But I think it's just guitar is guitar. I think people overthink it, But anyway, I had a fun time doing it and fun time learning, and it was exciting and getting in and getting the call and everything from Dave. It was like we tried out like it was like twice. Like the first time, everybody's like really quiet about it and everything. Let's just see what he's got. And then we're like, well, okay, well, I jammed like I don't know, like 4 songs, maybe like 5 or 6, and then it was like, okay, well, we'll be in touch. So went home and I wrote 2 songs, and I was just like, okay, well, because I knew that was like the next thing that's going to come because they're in the middle of doing a record, so they got to see if I can write. So they called me back like a week later or something, say, hey, you want to come back again and show us some stuff? And I was like, yeah. And so I wrote one, and I think I ended up writing a second one. And so I showed up for that rehearsal and was just kind of like, so yeah, came back. I was all stoked about the writing and stuff. And I said, well, hey, I know I told you I had this song, but I have another one I really want to do. So I had like 2, and we started working on them right away. And we instantly just clicked, like just doing that. And I think that was kind of what cemented it. And then of course on the way, and just remember hopping in my little truck and driving home, and Mike Dirks called me and was like, hey, he's very diplomatic about the joining the band. He was like, well, we've decided to use you for the fall tour. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, to use you.
So don't get
just
excited.
for the tour, And I was just like, okay. That's cool, whatever. And so I hang up the phone, and I'm already excited. I'm like, I'm going to do the fucking tour. I'm going to get a costume. It's fucking great. And then Dave Brockie calls me like 2 minutes later, and his reaction is totally different. He was just like, hey, dude. And I was like, hey, what's up? And he's like, did Mike tell you? And I was like, he told me I'm doing the tour. He was like, you're in the band. And he was screaming it at me on the phone. I was like, I'm in the band. I was like, well, he just said I was just doing the tour. He's like, oh, no, fuck that. You're not just, you're in the band. Like, you're in the band. And I was like, well, hell yeah. He was like, tell anybody you want. You're in the band. And I was like, all right, hell yeah. So I remember I hung up, and I was like a minute from the house. And I just remember kicking the door open, like, honey, guess what? And she was excited. She was excited for me at the time. But at the same time, she was like, oh, no, because now I was touring before that, but it was nowhere near to the degree that Gwar was touring,
Right. Yeah. So that's an entirely different animal, because obviously there's 13 layers to that band that most bands have one. Some
That's
bands
true.
might have 2 layers, as far as wardrobe and
Yep.
and music, and then you get into Gwar and you've got so much more going on.
More that goes into the show too. My God, like who? So who actually organized like that stage show that you guys had? Because it's just like Chad said. There's so many layers to Gwar. It's crazy.
It's all DIY stuff, even at that level. It's insane. It's insanity, like how much they try to take on. It's a fucking thankless job sometimes. And there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. Sweat equity, but that you don't really get paid for, and that's just the name of the game. So yeah, the band, the dynamic kind of has changed throughout the years, but the core of it today is you've got like Bob Gorman, Matt McGuire, and those guys were basically the costume guys, and they would have some other hands kind of come in and out to help out, like build stuff. And then at the time, Dave was his voice to kind of help organize the show and everything. And I kind of always saw it as those core 3 that were kind of like here are the ideas and here's what we're going to build and put together. But it was always kind of universal. Like the band had meetings all the time, even way back in the day. And those ideas were always like spitballing ideas about the show. Like we had a business meeting once a week that was like separate from the creative meetings and all that stuff. So it was, you would think it would be really structured, but a lot of times it's like, high as gas, like talking about drawing, making a giant dick to fuck something with. And so
and it was all
interesting.
DIY. Imagine that. It was all DIY. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you
So
like
I
them
mean,
apples?
but they still do. It's a little bit different because now the musicians, I think, are a little bit more hands off with the creation of the props and all that. But it used to be everyone had their hands in it at one point in time, like back in the 90s and the 80s. Like everyone in the band was making stuff, But now the musicians just do music, and the other guys in the shop, and now they have Margaret, another lady that's in there helping them out, and she's actually part of the show now, and she just started to do the tours like right when I stepped away. So they got a lot of talent in there to kind of help keep things going, and they need it. They need young blood in there to keep it fresh.
That keep the energy alive,
Cool.
I would assume,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
So,
and of course the new guy who took my spot, he's a little bit younger, and he's just full of life, full of energy. So I think he's a shot in the arm they definitely needed, because I was burnt.
yeah, I could see it. I mean, I could totally see how that would happen. So when you get in there in character development, costume development, you get into the band, whatever, is it pretty much like, here's your rubber boots and your thong? Or do you get like say so in your character, like your personality and your costume? Or
At the beginning, it was kind of like I just basically went in Dave's office, and and when I say office, I'm talking about like, there's like shit everywhere, and the tables destroyed from art and painting and oil canvases, and there's latex everywhere. I mean, it's like, so these aren't like corporate offices, but
right.
reeked weed in there and everything. But we would sit in there and talk shit, and he had a kind of these ideas. There was a couple different character ideas that he was coming up with, and he had sketches for them. And the other guy, Matt McGuire, also had some sketches of what they thought the character could look like. And they basically it could have gone a different ways, but they were like, well, what do you like? I kind of gravitated towards this Pustulus idea. And that's kind of the one that they all like too. And I was like, okay, great. And they're like, so we did some sketches on, well, what do you think about all this? And basically, like, it was supposed to be some kind of like a caveman aspect that's a little bit different from Flatus, which was like kind of reptilian. So they were thinking, well, let's do something that's a little bit more based around mammals, woolly mammoths and shit like that. And then I just said, well, I just want the face to be blue, because Flatus was red and green. I'd like to do blue and maybe like brown and ice colors and shit like that. So I had a little bit of say in at least how some of it, And of course, the character, Dave and I kind of decided what I guess the attitude was going to be, and like it was kind of weird at first. Like the Pustulus was supposed to be deaf, and it was a really, really hard gag to keep up. So yeah, so we just kind of I gave that up pretty quick, because it was just like, I cannot keep this fucking going. And
Right.
yeah, and it just hamstrung the character. So you find your own voice, and I just kind of thought that Pustulus would be a good exaggeration of kind of like my inner anger and disposition, because don't have the most sunshiny outlook on life, so I just kind of would take that to the extreme, and just like, he hates everything, and not happy, and definitely like the opposite of the way that I am with a lot of stuff. Because it's like, well, why be yourself? Why does Pustulus need to be a devoted father and a loving husband, he needs to be like a piece of shit, and he makes a lot of kids and abandons them and will not raise them, does nice stuff for other people that don't deserve it and shit like that, like just a really bad person, the anti-hero.
Yeah, when the first time I met Pusty, I felt like it was obviously Odorous was such a dominating character, such a great personality, that I would say your character, having known you prior, was almost like the perfect cartoon version of Brent. Like when I'd listen to you talk and I'd watch you walk around, it was like you could see you in there, but it just reminded me of a cartoon, like how all that worked out, which I thought was wonderful. I thought you did a great job with it and finding a character, and not to talk negatively about some of the guys in the past that have been through there, but some of the guys I don't think landed their character as well, and so it was nice to see how that kind of almost like you were born to do it, at least for that time.
Thank you. I mean, I had a lot of fun, and I felt comfortable doing that, and I maybe not at first. I mean, you could probably see the awkwardness in some of the earlier interviews, but after a while, I think you do have to put on an act, and you do kind of have to believe it, I mean, I think that's true with any type of acting, but it is, you gotta be that character. You have to be who that is. And I think it's just like it with anything else, like the way you conduct yourself daily as a person, you already have these like rules and these mantras for yourself, like I'm going to hold the door open for this person, or if I find an envelope full of money, I'm going to hand it back to the person that dropped it. And you just have a way that you're going to conduct yourself, how you treat others and all that stuff. So really, you just have to just adopt a whole set of principles like that for another person that's going to pretend to be.
Right.
And that's really it. It's just stick to that. And I think some of the characters that really aren't sure-footed and didn't quite land, I don't think they quite figure that out. Some of them never really do. But, I mean, that's not Gwar specific, but just any kind of characters and bands. Like, you got to commit to it and stay with it.
And I think some personalities just can't. You know what I mean? Like, just some people just aren't born to act.
And you also have to have like a certain belief, like in that character too. Like you almost have to like internally process it and believe it and fully commit. Like that's a whole other ball game to play, especially in a gig like Gwar. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you can't be concerned with how, just like yourself, you can't be overly concerned with what other people think. Like you can't change your principles because you're trying to impress a certain audience on Monday and a different one on Tuesday. You got to be the same
right.
thing.
Right.
And I saw a lot of kind of that wish-washiness with certain ones, and it's just kind of like, man, just go for it. Just own it. Fuck it.
Yeah, why not? Hey.
I remember walking around NAMM and following behind and just listening to it's like nothing was safe. If you were in in audio range, you were going to get fired at, and it was.
I should have been there.
Oh man, it was fantastic. And, I think that's got to be almost. I wouldn't say all the time, but a good chunk of the time, it's got to kind of be relieving. Like I can just say shit, and your costume's like a bulletproof vest.
Oh yeah, well, because Dave was the best teacher, and that was the whole thing about believing what you're doing and just being unapologetic about it, and just you're immersed in the thing. I mean, it is a transition. You put the mask on and you become that thing,
right?
And it's like, I mean, I try to do a character when I'm playing in my other bands, and maybe it's not an extreme version of something, but the guy who's out there turning wrenches on my truck is not the same dude that's on stage playing, because why would you want to see the mechanic fucking
right
playing guitar? But whatever,
that's absolutely true, man.
Boy, that'd be interesting.
It is true, and I think that's exactly right. Like you look at sometimes and take that principle right down to the grassroots. Like you go and watch a band play, just a small time band play, and you look at one guy and you're like, that dude's got it. Like whatever that is. He might not be the best musician in the world or the best vocalist in the world, but there's some kind of magic
to stage presence.
And that's just that.
Yeah.
You can step into a character that isn't, your daily grind. It's not your day job person, and you get on stage and you can become that personality. And, it just takes a whole crew of that, I suppose, to make up what Gwar was,
How do you flip that switch, Brent? Like, I mean, playing those like different like personas and then just being like yourself normal every day. Like, how do you flip that switch?
Like I was saying with Dave being I don't think Dave sought out to be a teacher, but that's who I looked to figure this stuff out. And he just had such a great way of doing it, and a lot of the guys did, especially in the earlier parts of the band. It just worked with all of them together. They all were very immersed in what they were doing and believed it. But Dave especially, like, wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He was never afraid of the consequences, and a lot of the times he was being provoking for the sake of provoking. But he was a really sharp guy too. He was really, really smart and well read and well thought out. So you could end up having like a discussion with him about all kinds of stuff until the wee hours of the morning. You're like, how the fuck do you even have this perspective? Like, how do you know all this stuff? So I think that kind of like double barrel assault of being really offensive, knowing where the jugular is at all times, and having the wit to back it up was like, that's why he's the front man, that larger than life personality. But I just looked at the way he did it. It was like, it was unwavering, very sure of yourself, speak fast, and
be confident.
You need
exactly.
Like that too.
Exactly.
You definitely need somebody like that in the band that will tell it to you straight and at the same time have that kind of worldly perspective that you're talking about. Like, that to me is like, that's the epitome of like a leader right there. So when you left Gwar, I had read some articles and stuff and researched some prior interviews and stuff, and it said that like you were still like involved with the band, but more like behind the scenes helping out.
Yeah. So we were
than being on stage playing.
So we were just trying to map it out and see, because we've got businesses together that we've started, and we had like a label and all this other shit happening and some endorsement deals here and there. And we were trying to figure out what the exit strategy was, because I didn't want to leave anybody hanging. Been with those guys for, it was like 11, 12 years, something like that. And I figured that I need to show this respect, because I still care about it. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so considering staying on to help do this label thing. And really, at the end of the day, so I really haven't been involved in any of it since I left. But the idea was there; it was on the table. We tried to talk about it and see what was going to happen, and really, like, nobody was really receptive to it, And I think that, and it wasn't like a personal slight or anything against me, but the band's communication is odd, for a bunch of adults. They don't communicate on a real super personal level. Like, even though I still see the guys all the time, I think they can all agree, like, we're all severely damaged individuals. But so yeah, and plus the label thing, it's great. I wish them the best. I really wish I could be involved in that, but at the same time, I can't really participate in a business with a bunch of we have different ideas of how a business should be run.
Sure. That's every business with a business partner.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just,
then
so I'm just kind of like, I don't want to be too overly personal about it. And I was just like, well, that's the other thing too. Like, I've got my own thing going, and it's doing well, and I'm happy doing it. So that's kind of why I just took more of this like hands-off approach, and plus they got it. They're going to do it the way they want to do it. And that's fine. So there's no hard feelings on it or anything like that. It's just the way it worked out. But if I didn't have a plumbing business, I would definitely still have my claws into something over there. But like I said, I'm busy with my own shit.
Sure. So with a band that off the wall, there has to be some pretty odd rules in being in that band, right? So
No, there's
really.
no fucking rules. No.
Gosh, I would sit here and think
That's
like,
what I would
okay,
guess. Yeah, seriously.
okay, Brent,
Yeah.
you're gonna wear these weird little pajamas, and you can't do this, and you can't talk about this, and
That's a
you
good
can't.
point.
Oh
You
my
know,
God. No. It is there are literally there are no fucking consequences for anything. It was,
amazing.
I mean, it's
You wouldn't think
ridiculous.
that. Yeah, wow, that's crazy.
I mean, for that thing to, it almost sounds like by hearing about it that, um, it seems kind of amazing that Gwar's been around for 30 plus years.
If I told you all the things that we did to each other, you'd how do you guys even speak? Like, how do you guys even talk to each other? And it's the level of absurdity is way up there too. It's
Sounds
out
like
of
a few
control.
different podcasts combined right there.
Right?
Yeah, sounds like a few
Oh,
different
dude.
podcasts combined. Holy crap.
I'll give you like this isn't even a PG version, but it's the most PG one I'll give you. Like so when I was like trying to come to grips with like how the fuck can this guy do this and everything's fine? Like why doesn't he get kicked out or why doesn't he get suspended or what the fuck? Like what do you do? Because you need everybody. That's the big thing too. It's like
Hmm.
as much as everyone, at one time or another thought that well this band could never survive without me because everyone, including myself, we've all had that thought.
Right.
So I don't want any. There's no questions about that. But so you can't get rid of anybody, and not that you really want to, because the strength of the band is the culmination of all the forces there. So anyway, but I was just like bewildered by the somebody could do something so fucked up and everything's fine. It's like so I was just like, well, if there are no fucking rules, then why the hell am I not like why am I not smoking weed in the front lounge of the bus? If that's because it's like, well, you're not supposed to. I'm like, well, you're not going to do anything about it. So I just like, I just made a fucking a bong out of an apple and just started ripping weed in the front lounge, and everybody was just like, God damn it, and they're like coughing, and because all the guys that didn't smoke would hang out in front. It's like, oh, you're supposed to go in the back, but you can only smoke weed back there. You can't smoke cigarettes. And it was like maybe 5 days, and I was just like, I don't give a shit. And I was like smoking cigarettes, smoking out of the apple, fucking just clouding up the fucking front. And it was just like, and people would open the door and be like, what are you doing? Because like, you're not supposed to do that. And I would just go, no rules. So it was like no rules night was basically that. It was just do whatever the fuck you want. Yeah. And it was just kind of like testing the fucking water of how bad can you be, and for better and for worse, that was just the way it was.
Right. Right. So obviously the band's had a long tenure, and like I mentioned prior, I mean, a cult following, unlike almost any other band in metal. You would think from an outsider's perspective, and I mean, I've played in bands a long time too, and I've toured and I've, put out records and whatever, and I've lost an exorbitant amount of money, more than I will ever make doing it.
Yeah,
But you would think a band
we
of
do
that
that.
size right, it's habitual. But you would think a band of the size and the magnitude of what Gwar is, that you would be able to make a decent income. But
If
rumor has it's quite the contrary.
Yep.
it really is the show. Like the show gets in the way of making a living doing it, and
Mhm.
that's the bottom line. It's because if you got to imagine that it's hard to come up with an example of a band that's like the same size that kind of does something similar. But I mean, let's just take for example another Richmond band. You got like Lamb of God or something. Now, of course, they've crossed this like other echelon that's like way up there. But even at the time, where I guess you could say they were almost on par with Gwar as far as ticket sales and all that. That band's overhead was 4 guys wearing cargo shorts and a couple of guitars
Mhm.
and some Mesa stacks. What's the production on that? You hire a lighting guy, like okay, so the take home for a band like that is going to be 4, 5, 10 times as much as a band like Gwar that's literally taking everything they make and it's being sunk into this show. So, and it's not just it's not just building the show. It's keeping the lights on, having a studio big enough to make all this stuff, because the Slave Pit in Richmond, it's pretty sizable. And then, of course, let's go back to like what another band could do. It's like, oh, you need a 10x10 room, and you cram together and write songs,
Right.
and you pay $200 a month for it, or you practice in somebody's basement or garage for free. It's like, no, this band's got a couple 1,000-foot warehouse that they're trying to build all of this stuff.
And a small band gets a tour in a van, and you guys, what? I'm sure you got
it
big rig.
has to be a bus. It has to be
plus
a bus.
a rig, right, for all your shit, like all the
Yeah. And we've tried every way under the sun to try and condense that into something more manageable. And it's just like that. The footprint is the footprint. It can't be cut down anymore. It's like you can do a box truck, but you can't go over 55 or some shit,
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, so not only do you lose time, but if you get a box truck, now you got to pay for hotels for a driver and all that stuff. Sometimes you need 2 drivers. So you get a semi so the guy can sleep in the semi sleeper, whatever, the truck. And then, of course, the semi, you need the space, you need the loading docks, you need the help to unload it, and the gear thing. And once you got the semi, it's like, well, why are we trying to condense this when we have the space to make our lives easier? So it's like, okay, we'll just jam more shit on there. And
so you guys did all your own setup and teardowns and all that stuff. I'm sure you had a small crew that was there with that, or was that just the band members? You jump out of your costume.
When I started, it was the band was doing all of it, 100%. We had a drum tech that would also do the sounds and audio. So not only was that guy doing drums, setting them up, he was also wiring the stage for monitors, doing some of the monitor work. We would utilize in-house monitor engineers for each gig. But I mean, like, everyone in that band wore 10 different hats. It's
right.
like, as me personally, it was like, I'm guitar tech, guitarist, anything that breaks that requires a soldering iron or a screwdriver, or I'm fixing that, and eventually got to the point where I was like taking a complete set of tools on tour, like a tool, like a 4-foot toolbox with everything in it, because it was just like, what am I working on today? The lights that broke, my amp that broke, a guitar that broke, a dick that broke, whatever. It's like we were trying to put it all back together. So it's gotten a little bit easier for the musicians over the last like few years, and well deserved, because it really started with Warped Tour. When we were doing that, the load-ins for Warped Tour, and any band that's ever done it can attest to this. It's brutal. Like, some of the bands don't even get told what time they're going on until like 9 in the morning, because the set would flip all the time, or the set times would be different. So with Gwar, it was like we had press and we had all these little appearances and things we had to kind of do during the day. And it was just unmanageable for the band to do those things and set the stage up in time to do the changeover and get dressed and all this shit. You would just work themselves to death. So we were like, we have to get a dedicated guitar tech for this. Like, there's no way we can come back to the stage 4 or 5 times a day and push gear, because that's kind of how it rotated. You would stage early in the morning. You would one band would set up, they would break, and the whole thing would start to move. So it was like you would constantly be inching up like every 45 minutes to an hour. So it was brutal, even for just the guys doing that. Like, not just the band, but the techs. I mean, that was a really hard gig. So hats off to those guys for muscling through that. But it was like, we had a guitar tech who was doing all of it. Like, he was doing bass, guitar, everything. We had a lighting guy that was doing drums. It was insane. And we burned that guy out. I remember, like, a lot of people quit after that. And I don't blame them because it was just a really fucking tough gig. But, like I said, hats off to those guys and much respect because, I mean, the hardest work, Gwar is always the people that have stuck with it are the hardest workers in the industry because you have to be.
Right.
And you have to be insane to want to do that. Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible to make a living doing music. You got to be creative in how you conduct the business and the business side of it. Honestly, it kind of makes me sick because that's part of. I want to be the guy that just works on his own truck and cuts his own grass and tinkers in my workshop all day long. That's fun to me, but you really have to commercialize and sell your art to really make money doing it. And that's it. It's a different perspective. It's a different way of going about it. And I don't really want to do it to that degree. Like I know what it takes to get on the cover of Guitar World, but I don't really, maybe I never would, but the commitment to being an artist that it would take to do that, to not just be an artist, but be a business savvy artist. It's like, I don't really want to do it. I don't want to sit on YouTube all day. I don't want to promote in social media. I don't want to be this like person that needs all this attention. I'd rather just sit around and smoke cigars and hang out at the house.
Speaking of being on social media and even YouTube, I was pretty blown away on the Purgasound draw that you have on YouTube.
It's a hell of a channel.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's a great channel.
It's kind of funny because I was talking to a buddy of mine about it yesterday, and he's like, "Well, what is it?" And I'm like, "Well, it's kind of a tech deal. It's kind of just an insight into Brent a little bit, and it's the one thing where I caught myself 35 minutes later watching him rewire a cabinet, even though I'm never going to rewire a Marshall." I'm still watching it a half hour later. Yeah. It's because I think you have a great way of putting it out there in an instructive manner that doesn't seem like you're being taught. Like you can just absorb it.
Almost as if he's a natural teacher.
Yeah.
Like with the way he does it. And like it keeps you engaged the entire time. Cause I was watching it last night, like as part of like my research for this. And I was like, wow, this guy's got a good teaching ability. Like reminds me of some of my favorite teachers I had in high school. Like just personable, straight to the point, kind of like keeps you interested. I don't even know how you do that, man, but it's pretty crazy.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that because honestly, I don't know what the hell I'm doing with YouTube. Like I haven't uploaded a video in probably months, and it really just boils down to time. I have a shitload of footage, but it's just time to just sit down and crunch it and edit it. I just haven't. I've been doing a lot of other things, but yeah, the YouTube thing is interesting. It's cool. It's something I want to do, but just the time investing into it. And like I said, I'm still figuring it out. Like, I don't know when you first start doing even stuff like this, like podcasts, and hearing yourself speak, and you just start to pick up on all your little mannerisms and how many times you say and like and sniff after you talk. It's just or what words do I constantly trip up on?
Well, if it's any consolation on that, I think that's what probably is a big draw to what you do, right? Because there's a lot of people on YouTube that are just actors, and when people are tuning into what you're doing, it's probably because you're not acting. It's probably because of your likes and ums and sniffles and the reality. Like, this dude actually knows what the fuck he's talking about, and it's easier to absorb. Like the curiosity, once again, even as we look at you right now, sitting here, and there's dudes that are probably like counting Marshall cabinets, and the curiosity that's there. So,
and I think what makes him good is that I think in some ways there's a segment of society that's kind of tired of the influencer culture on YouTube. It might not be a huge segment of society, but there's a segment of society that really wants like authentic content. They don't want to always be like sold luxurious lifestyles on YouTube. They don't always want to be positively motivated by some speech. Seeing like real, raw, like authentic content that might be applicable to what they like maybe is what they're looking for. So maybe that's why like his stuff resonates with people.
Yeah. So you when you started, you just did a tech video. How did you start? What was the path?
I think the idea was, so I really, really want to build. I do build amplifiers, and I kind of always had this dream of like doing my own, line or brand or whatever. And I'm in plenty of the online forums, and that's kind of where I got my start in learning how to repair stuff and just gaining insight there. And I know this is a long-winded answer, but the whole point was I kind of saw the level of respect that certain techs had, and when certain people would build things, a lot of them already had this like kind of like pedigree, you know, and sometimes somebody would come out of the woodwork and try to launch this amp brand, and nobody's heard of them, and they got no connection to. There's no like community behind it, and it's a tough business just like anything else, and they just kind of would fall flat. And some of these products, or amplifiers, were made by some really talented people, but they just didn't have like a background or something. They didn't have any notoriety to it. So what I started the YouTube channel was, well, if I make amps one day for other people to buy, they got to know that I know what I'm doing. And then of course you start doing it and you're like, do I even know what the fuck I'm doing? Like, probably not, and I think everybody goes through that because you get stumped all the time. And that's, I think, of course, with each repair, you get better. But, so there's a ton of stuff I don't film, but I'm like, that's basically it. Like, I want to be honest and be raw and just show that this is what I'm passionate about doing. Here's how I'm fixed it. Here's how I'm solving this problem. And maybe I don't know the best way to do it, but this is the way I'm going to do it. And I just know that on the other side of whatever I'm working on is going to be a positive result. So, and then just try to do all the things that you see other people, or try to warn about the shit that people do. Like, don't fire the parts cannon at the amp, look at things objectively. Same with cars, it's like, don't just guess, figure out why you have the problem and what you need to solve it.
Right.
So
right. So
still,
you do,
still learning.
Yeah. So you do a lot of different stuff then. Obviously, cab refurbs, heads, pedals. I'm assuming guitar work. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, there's just nobody in Richmond that's really doing that. There's a couple repair guys, but most of the most talented techs kind of in the area, when I was even growing up, it was like, okay, you've got this one guy who's got a really shitty attitude, and he's good. And then it's like, and then you got another guy who lives like an hour and a half south, just a kid trying to get your amp fixed, and you're like, what do I do? And there was no community of those guys talking either. They didn't. Musicians talk to each other. These guys didn't. Everybody's kind of in their own little world. And so I remember I took my amp to a guy, and he just didn't. He knew how to. He could have fixed it. He wouldn't turn it all the way up to make it